Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 201 to 210. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Cracking his neck, Adrian heaved a sigh of relief. I needed that, he said satisfied as he looked at the bottom of the sewer. Today was Saturday and it was time to have another class with Hazel. On Monday he had given her some combat classes and today it would be mysticism classes. Her stance may be bad but she has a good kick. I have to see how she moves a bit more, but so far the most suitable style that I noticed for her is Taekwondo. Adrian thought seriously, already entering his profile as a teacher. Having been a professional fighter in his past life, reaching the point of being an international champion made it very easy for him to teach someone how to fight. Mastering multiple combat styles and combining them to create one suitable for him had been a necessity. He knew karate, taekwondo, boxing, Muay Thai, judo, Greco-Roman wrestling, jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and wushu. Remembering how he had suffered to learn karate made him let out a short laugh as he shook his head. Sometimes he wondered how high he would have gotten if it wasn't for that car accident. Could that have changed anything? Would he still be in his world? Together with his family, having a normal life, only having to worry about his exams? He let out a soft breath as he shook his head. I can't change the past, only the present matters, he thought calmly as he waited for class time to arrive. Good evening, Teacher Holmes, Hazel said as she bowed slightly in front of Adrian. Adrian gave a soft smile as he nodded slightly. Good evening, Hazel, have you been practicing what I asked you to do? Hazel nodded and gave a series of different kicks showing that she had been practicing. Very good, try to turn with more speed and use your hips more. Adrian said while demonstrating, having noticed just a few issues with how Hazel had kicked. Thanks teacher, I'll keep practicing. Hazel was a little disappointed as she nodded. She thought her kicks were perfect but she still lacks. She hoped to surprise Holmes to show that she was a skilled and good student. After all, the name James Holmes was ringing a lot more in noble circles. The other noble children she had to deal with kept talking about him and she couldn't help but smile with pride. That same man is teaching me mysticism and is making me stronger, unlike you who are left to talk about useless things about who will dance with whom like little children fighting over candy. Soon I'll be better than you, she thought as a person appeared in her mind. An extremely beautiful young lady with emerald green eyes and soft blonde hair. She would normally have a sweet smile, but in her mind her smile was arrogant, looking at her as if she was superior in every way. This caused her to clench her fists, but before her mind could continue, Adrian's voice interrupted her. This time we will be studying a little mysticism. First of all, do you know what spirit vision is? At the redhead's question, Hazel nodded excitedly. Finally. It was one of the first things teacher Flora taught me other than how to steal people carefully. Adrian gave a slight nod and he took out several candles and other materials from his jacket. That makes things easier. Now I'm going to teach you how to do simple rituals. Adrian had spent the last few days reading and poring over the book that Isengard gave him. Now he mastered a decent amount of various rituals and could even teach about some. Simple rituals. Nodding, Adrian set aside the things he took from his jacket. It is a way of requesting power from great existences to help us accomplish various tasks. Whether it is in the elaboration of talismans, charms, or asking to speak with someone's spirit. Ads by PubFuture. There are all kinds of rituals, but for now we will study the simple ones. Hazel nodded and listened carefully to what Adrian was saying. Let's start with the most important and necessary. Hazel, as you are noble, I will assume you can speak Hermes, correct? Hazel nodded. Well then I want you to start learning ancient Hermes too. Hazel nodded again, but this time she spoke. Teacher Holmes, Teacher Flora already asked me that and I've been learning it for the last 2 months. I already know how to speak it pretty well according to what she told me last time. Adrian's eyes widened slightly, but then he let out a soft laugh. That makes it easier. It seems Flora does know how to teach after all, Adrian said amused, but he heard a woman's voice in his ear. I'm still here, you know. Ignoring the worm woman, he returned his attention to Hazel. As you already know Hermes, now we can go to the second most important thing, and that is the altar. Adrian explained to Hazel the method taught by the book as well as the enormous danger that would be if she dared to pray to some evil god. Hazel took everything the redhead said with absolute seriousness and made sure to chisel what he had said into her mind. Do you have any questions? Hazel shook her head. The redhead had explained everything quite well and delved into aspects that he considered difficult. Okay, so now I'll show you why this was our first class, Adrian said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to Hazel. Curious Hazel grabbed the paper and saw it. It had something written on it. The special spirit that wanders through the upper realm. The trustworthy spirit who is friendly to humans. The companion spirit of James Holmes. Raising an eyebrow, she looked at her teacher, waiting for an explanation. Adrian let out a soft laugh. That is the incantation of my messenger. If you have an emergency or doubt that cannot wait, you can write a letter and invoke it through the ritual that I taught you. She will deliver the letter to me. Messenger. Hazel blurted out curiously. It's also called a contracted spirit that is in charge of mailing letters. Think of it like the postman, explained Adrian, stealing the words of a certain fool. I doubt Klein cares. After all, he hasn't said it yet, so I'm not stealing anything, the redhead thought, pleased as the smile he wore shone with a bit of mischief. You must say this in Hermes for it to work. Adrian explained, then chuckled. I wrote the incantation in Lonus to keep you from reading it out loud, I'm glad you didn't. Hazel raised a slightly offended eyebrow as she snorted. I don't mean to offend Teacher Holmes, but I'm not an idiot. Who would be foolish enough to say an incantation out loud? Hazel asked, not expecting an answer. A salty fish, Adrian answered quickly with a smile. Excuse me, Hazel asked, confused. What would a salty fish have to do with what they were talking about? It's a joke where I come from. You wouldn't understand, Adrian said, amused as he chuckled. Hazel just nodded with a raised eyebrow. Whatever you say, Teacher Holmes. ... His vision was blurred and he saw in front of him a gray mist that slowly turned into a scene. He could see what he assumed must be some street on Backland Bridge. On the sidewalk, it was highlighted how a person walked with a slightly accelerated step among the people with an unknown destination. This was a normal-looking woman in a simple dress. Suddenly this woman began to run among the people, throwing multiple to the ground. She even knocked people taller than her to the ground. Other people began to chase her, and one of them, a woman, had a strange blue-covered book in her hand. This woman opened the book and pointed at the woman who was running. Ads by PubFuture. The pages of the book began to shine, but the woman kept running. Suddenly the people who were chasing her took out revolvers and automatic weapons and started shooting at her. This caused chaos to start in the street. In acrobatic moves that didn't make sense for a woman of that size, she managed to dodge the shots. Suddenly a man at the end of the street turned and pointed an automatic weapon at her and pulled the trigger. Unable to dodge, the woman was engulfed in flames and appeared on the other side of the street, coming out of the flames. She was so focused on escaping that she never realized that the people who took the bullets and were on the ground were not bleeding. Still standing where the woman who had opened the book was, she watched as everything happened with cold eyes. She released a shaky breath. The target has been captured, Janice. You can get out now. The woman released a sigh as she opened her eyes and released the book that fell into the hands of a brown-haired man. The woman who was running away was now on the ground and had a necklace around her neck. She was asleep. The chaos that covered the street had disappeared, no person was hurt. In fact, they all watched as the woman was being handcuffed with doubt. In their eyes, she had run for a few seconds before falling asleep on the ground. Another person approached the brown-haired man and whispered to him. Captain Eakinser, Harry Grand has been captured. We are transporting him to the base. At that moment everything he saw broke as if it were glass and he woke up alarmed and sweating in his bed. Nathan, what's wrong? Sasha asked worriedly as she woke up too. Nathan's eyes dropped a little to his partner's nudity, but he shook his head. I need to do a divination, Nathan said seriously as he got up and went to the room that he had modified. Entering the dark room, he grabbed a piece of paper by his side and wrote, Reason for my dream. After that, he closed his eyes and entered a cogitation state. The gray mist reappeared and he saw the scene of how the faceless who was chasing them ran away after losing his partner. The scene broke and Nathan's eyes widened in surprise. Not trusting, he grabbed his pendulum and began to murmur in a low voice. Harry Grant was the one chasing us. After repeating that 7 times, he observed how the pendulum began to rotate clockwise at high speed. Nathan watched this in shock. The dream turned out to be a revelation, he murmured in astonishment. But is it one from the future or past? Closing his eyes again, he muttered 7 times. Harry Grant has been captured. After a few moments, he opened his eyes again and saw how the pendulum stayed still. Nathan did not give importance to this and also interpreted it in another way. Divination has been interfered with. When I divined that Harry Grant was the one chasing us, there was no interference because it wasn't direct at him. And when I divined about his status, the interference occurred. That means he's already been captured. The dream was a revelation of the past. Adjusting her hidden triangular sword, Zio only let out a sigh as she entered Braveheart's bar. This time she hadn't been able to get much information about the policeman. If the information in the newspapers was anything to go by, then Holmes had already taken care of Clark down. I have to work hard to get that formula. There hasn't been a blood moon in a long time and I don't know how much time we have before the ravings arrive. Zio thought worriedly as she passed the doors of Braveheart's bar. At the time of entering, all the drunks who were there turned to look at who it was. When they saw that it was the threatening Zio Derecha, they moved from the road pale. Cowards, Zio thought as she approached the bartender who was watching how some drunks left the bar at high speed. He did not regret much about this, they would return. Looking into the green eyes of the petite woman, he already knew what she wanted. First floor, poker room, he said without looking at her while cleaning a glass. Zio didn't say anything, just nodded and headed into the room. Opening the door, she ran into the same scene as always. Men with a cold aura like corpses playing cards and the old man sitting to the side drinking what seemed to be wine. Approaching the only one that didn't have that cold aura, she reached into her vest and pulled out an envelope sealed with a yellow seal. For Mr. B. The old man looked at the letter and shook his head as he placed his glass on the table. Mr. B says that the commission is over. What? Zio thought, frozen. Her heart had sunk and she felt as if it had stopped beating. But I thought I did a good job. Was I cheated? Did Holmes lie? How can I save Furs now? Will I have to see her die in front of my eyes? I will lose another sister. All kinds of thoughts filled Zio's mind and she could feel her vision blurring. The old man then took out an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Zio, who snapped out of her spell and looked at the envelope in surprise as she grabbed it. This is for you, said the old man, and with that done the man got up and grabbed a book that was next to him. He went to one of the free tables. Zio couldn't care in the least about this, but she broke the seal on the envelope and took out the letter. Dear Miss the information you gave me was very useful, and thanks to it I was able to catch Clark down. Unfortunately, due to a friendly chat I had with him, I learned that the rest of the policemen will be untraceable, so the commission is over. Ads by PubFuture. But don't worry, because your work with Clark will be enough to sell you the Trickmaster formula. I am also willing to sell you the formula at half price if you give me the Sequence 9 Apprentice Potion formula. Considering you need the Sequence 8 Potion formula, then you have a Sequence 9 friend. Getting it shouldn't be a problem. I'm not sure when you will read this letter, so we will meet at the abandoned ceramics factory in East Borough this coming Wednesday. _JH_. Praise the goddess. Zio couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief as she touched her chest 4 times counterclockwise in a circle. Holmes can be very provocative, but he's not a liar when it comes to dealings. Overthink for nothing, Zio thought as she tucked the letter into her vest and left the poker room and Braveheart's bar. Hearing how the door of her house was opened, Furs quickly got up from the sofa where she was lying. Arranging the pillows and grabbing her notebook and pencil, she began to write, trying to look like she was working. Welcome, Zio, you came back early, Furs said with a smile, trying to hide her sleepiness. Zio, who just entered the room, saw this with a flat face. Quote. Raising an eyebrow, she pointed to the drool that left a trail on Furs's face. Shit. Furs cursed under her breath as she quickly rubbed her hand across her cheek to wipe away the drool. It was just a nap. Plop. Furs was interrupted in the middle of her sentence because Zio threw a piece of paper to her face. Removing the paper from her face, Furs gave an embarrassed smile at her friend, who was looking at her with a flat face. Sorry. Zio raised her hand while cutting off Furs, who closed her mouth. Read it, she said, pointing to the paper, and Furs raised an eyebrow as she looked at the paper. Her drool stained the paper a bit, but it hadn't touched the red ink on it, so she had no trouble reading it. The more she read, her other eyebrow rose until they both almost touched her scalp. She looked at Zio in a daze and the short woman nodded. Do you remember the formula? Furs came out of her surprise and jumped up from the sofa. Yes, I kept it under my bed. Furs said, recovering from her daze. But as soon as she said that, she saw Zio give her a look with a raised eyebrow. Hee hee, Furs said with a small blush as she looked away. Zio, at the childishness of her friend, she only sighed while shaking her head. On Wednesday we will get the formula, and on Friday we will go to Mr. A's party to get the ingredients, and that same day you will advance, do you understand? Zio said seriously, and Furs nodded strongly. Furs felt the pressure in her friend's tone, and she knew there was nothing she could do, so she just accepted it. Seeing that the message had been understood, Zio nodded with a strong look. Ads by PubFuture. You can take these days to rest, you will need the energy on Friday. Furs felt tears form in her eyes upon hearing that. How am I supposed to rest with what you just said? Furs wailed internally as she nodded again at Zio's words. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me that. Monday 3 p.m. In Saphira Castle, in the magnificent palace, on the old and musty long bonds table. Klein watched as the two figures appeared in a crimson flash while another appeared in a torrent of crimson and black fire. Klein already had his spirit vision activated. He looked at Audrey's figure that was forming. He wasn't surprised to see how the colors deep within her aura had mixed. They had become serene and pure. She has already become a Beander. Just before he moved his gaze, Klein saw how the stars on the back of Audrey's chair were moving swiftly, forming a constellation that did not belong to reality. Giant dragon. Klein stopped himself from shaking his head, and using his control over the gray fog, he saw the back of Alger's chair. Windstorm. The colors deep within his aura grew stronger. Chariot really guessed it was for his promotion. Seafarer. I wonder what sequence it is, 7 or 6. Pushing those thoughts aside, he used his control over the gray fog again to see the symbol on the back of Adrian's chair. He saw the illusory constellation that formed the flaming red tip of a spear. War and power. Which pathway does this symbol represents? Klein thought curiously, but he resisted the urge to look at Chariot for fear of being discovered by him, like the hanged man had been last Monday. The bullying that the man received was still fresh in his mind. I don't know if he has the guts to make that same movement with me, but just in case I better not look at him, Klein decided. Tapping the long table 3 times just like before, and smiled as he said. Congratulations, Miss Justice, you are now a Beander. He can notice it so fast. Audrey was stunned and smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Fool, and thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. That was a lot faster than I thought, Alger said honestly. Hee, Mr. Hanged Man, don't tell me you forgot that Miss Justice is a noble. It would be very strange if she hadn't become a Beander by now. Adrian said, amused. Congratulations on advancing to sequence 7, by the way. Adrian added matter-of-factly as if it were no big deal. Thank you, Mr. Chariot, Alger said tensely. He was no longer a folk of rage, so it was easier for him to control himself, but that didn't mean anything when Chariot arrived. We haven't even been in the meeting for 3 minutes and they're already fighting. Mr. Chariot, you really can't help but bully Mr. Hanged Man, right? Klein thought as the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He was looking at the poor Hanged Man. Trying to prevent the assault from continuing, Klein tapped his glabella twice and said with a smile. Gentlemen, miss, did any of you manage to get hold of Russell's diary? Hearing the question, Audrey didn't immediately respond like in the past. Instead, she opened her crystalline eyes and looked at the Hanged Man and Chariot with a scrutinizing attitude. Alger unconsciously subdued his body movements while Adrian couldn't care less. I have 2 pages, Mr. Fool, Adrian said with a smile, and this caused Klein, whose face was covered by the gray fog, to slightly narrow his eyes in suspicion. I don't know why, but I don't like that tone. Is my intuition telling me something? Klein thought in complete distrust at Chariot's normal tone, but outwardly he just nodded. I have found 2 pages of the Russell Emperor's diary and have memorized its contents, Alger said after adjusting his body. I have a page, Audrey said as if she were removed from the conversation. Pretty good. Klein didn't let his joy or excitement show in his voice. Should we now? Audrey inquired in a simple tone. Yes, Klein simply nodded. He maintained his stance without any change. He had to be careful in front of the spectator. Adrian watched all this in amusement as a parchment of yellow-brown goatskin and a red fountain brush appeared in front of him, Alger, and Audrey. Audrey in her spectator state looked at Chariot, and she was able to read the man with ease. He seems very amused and at the same time expectant, as if waiting for the theater show to start. Audrey analyzed Chariot, but when she saw the man grab the pen, she did the same. Let's see how I do this, thought Adrian seriously as he felt the fountain pen in his hand. He didn't need to recall the symbols because he understood them, so what he did was imbue the emotion of writing normally. Silently, lines of text began to appear on the goatskin. They all looked well written but still had a certain ugliness to them. No symbols were missing and the sentences were complete. It's not as ugly as Russell's handwriting, but it would be enough, thought Adrian with satisfaction. Russell's handwriting and his weren't that different, both were ugly, but Adrian could defend himself that he didn't fully learn it while Russell was a native speaker. The Emperor's handwriting did not have the right to be so ugly. At the same time that he finished writing, Alger and Audrey did as well and all the parchments reappeared in Klein's hands. I hope you enjoy those pages as much as I do, the redhead thought pleased as he watched Klein read. Looking at the diary pages sent by the Hanged Man and Justice, he noticed that symbols were missing and wrong. Luckily the web novels I read on Quadime had censored characters, so I'm used to this. Klein ignored the and began to read. April 8th. I stood at the Black King's bow and stretched out my arms, saying to Grimm and Edwards. Finishing reading the face of the page, Klein was a bit confused. When Emperor Russell, who was born in the Intis Kingdom, set off on a voyage. The Fog Sea should be the ocean west to the Intis Republic. Yes, I need to use the historical information from the library to cross-reference this. With a plan to visit the library, Klein turned the page. October 2nd. They actually want me to marry Matilda from the Abel family without even consulting me first. Heavens, I haven't even met her. October 5th. Miss Matilda is very pretty. October 6th. Her personality and demeanor is just my type. I'm starting to look forward to the marriage. Hey Emperor, where is your integrity? Klein leaned back in his chair, not allowing his emotions to get through the fog. He looked down at the last sentence on this page. October 9th. They called me the son of steam. I quite like that. He was a little disappointed that the information on the first 2 pages is so little. But he didn't get puffed up with this. Instead, he began to read the 3rd page. This one had content on both sides. May 21st. Ads by PubFuture. The Church of the God of Craftsmanship gave me 2 options, 2 beginning sequences, one of them is Savon. This is a complete pathway sequence that they own. The other one is Mystery Prior. May 22nd. My decision was very easy. Savon. May 23rd. I have become a Savon. May 24th. I have noticed something worth mentioning. When I direct myself as a Savon, doing things that are in line with this role, the mutterings that made me go crazy to have become considerably softer. Is this the Mr. Zaratul spoke of? Chariot called it, but he also told the risk in using it. While reading this, Klein realized that there was a big difference between him and Emperor Russell. For example, regarding the matter of returning home, Klein considers grasping in-depth knowledge to avoid risk and achieve his goal, while Emperor Russell prefers to rely on himself and face risks. I have to say, I envy people like that sometimes. Perhaps everyone wants things they don't have. Of course, I also have to consider strengthening myself. Both things are important, he thought, sighing a little. The description given by Russell had helped him confirm what Chariot had said in the last Tarot Club. With the pages that Hanged Man and Justice delivered, now only the pages that Chariot had delivered were missing. Using the corners of his eyes, he looked at how Chariot still kept that small smile. I feel that there was something in the tone with which he spoke. Does he know that my mask is a fake? No, that can't be. He may have the guts to annoy the other members, but he never went overboard. That will be because he respects me as a great existence. Klein didn't know where that mistrust had come from, so he sighed internally to calm down. Chariot bullying managed to enter my head. He grabbed the first page and began to read. The first thing he noticed was how the pages delivered by Chariot had no missing or wrong symbols. It seems that the pages that Chariot has are complete, unlike those obtained by the other 2. I should not rule out that he may also have a better memory than the Hanged Man and Justice. August 7th. Young Beatrice grew up to be a very beautiful woman. She was about 18 years old the last time I saw her. August 9th underscore. I'm honestly speechless. Today I attended another of those annoying parties of those damned nobles. August 12th underscore. Beatrice showed me that she is already a woman and very passionate about it. Emperor, where is your code? The corners of his mouth began to quiver a little more forcefully. A sexual escapade of Russell. Why didn't I expect that when I just read how quickly he agreed to marry a stranger just because she was pretty? Trying to divert his attention, he grabbed the next page. November 13th underscore. This is the first and last time I have a threesome with another man. I don't even know how I agreed to do that in the first place. Ads by PubFuture. I sure drink too many glasses of wine. For anyone who can understand my diary, please listen to my suffering, because what happened last night I don't plan to reveal it to another soul in my life. If you understand my diary, that means you are a fellow one, so I can tolerate revealing this to you. It all started at the birthday party of the wife of one of the high-ranking men in the government. Obviously, since I am the protagonist of this era, I was invited, so I attended because the man's wife is beautiful. Since I saw her for the first time in Parliament, I knew that she had to be one of my conquests, so when I saw that her husband had gone to talk to his friends, I knew that an opportunity had come. She turned out to be much more flirtatious than I thought. The women of Intis are without a doubt special. Just when I thought I could finally win her over, her husband came back. I thought I had lost my chance, but something happened that I didn't expect even a woman from Intis to be able to say. She, with her damn husband by her side, looked me in the eye and said, "Would you like to have a threesome with us?" I swear I thought her husband was going to hit me, but he just gave me a knowing smile and said, "My wife is very good with her mouth. You have to try it." But bastard, that's your wife. You can't just offer it like that. The worst thing is that the woman licked her lips and winked at me. What was I supposed to do? After seeing that, I accepted without hesitation, and I'm sure it was the wine talking. Without knowing it, I had fallen into his trap. The three of us left the room where the party was being held and went to his marriage room. Their damn marriage room. It was a bit awkward being naked in front of another man, but at least his wife's body had my full attention. I admit the bastard was right, his wife's mouth is amazing. Her tongue touched me in ways I didn't know were possible. With the games finished, it was time for the main event. It kills me to admit it, but it was fun and a refreshing experience. Between men, we understand each other after all. After moving his wife around like a doll for 1 hour, the bastard took a break. It makes sense, after all, he is a normal person and I am a Sequence 7 Beander and the protagonist of this era. So from that moment it was his wife and me. Having the husband watch me explore his wife's caverns was certainly weird. After 15 minutes she was showing me the skills of her mouth again, and at that moment I made the biggest mistake of my life. I looked at the ceiling and closed my eyes. I was so absorbed in her mouth that I didn't realize that her husband had knelt next to her. At one point she stopped, but it only lasted a few seconds, and then she came back with everything. It seemed that she had become a void that didn't let anything out. That's why I couldn't stand it and end up shooting in her mouth. When I opened my eyes to praise her for her skill, I was met with pure horror. It wasn't her mouth. It was his mouth. Cough. Upon reading that last part, Klein couldn't control himself and ended up letting out a soft cough. This somewhat surprised Audrey and Alger, who looked at Mr. Fool wanting to know what was written. What great secrets have to be written on those pages to provoke the reaction of a great existence? Alger thought in surprise. Audrey had snapped out of the spectator state in surprise and was looking at Mr. Fool, waiting for him to say something. I almost lost control of my mask. Klein thought in much alarm, but outwardly he just lowered the page slightly and looked at the trio in front of him. "Excuse me, this diary surprised me a bit," he said with a tight little smile that Audrey would have noticed if it weren't for Klein making the fog that covered his face a little thicker. He looked at Alger with that same smile, and this made the man lower his head slightly. Why does Mr. Fool stare at me so much? Did he feel that I thought of him? Do not meddle in the affairs of great existences, thought the man, alarmed. He was praying that Mr. Fool would not take this offense of his very deep. But Klein was actually looking at the hanged man, so he could use the corners of his eyes to look at Chariot. "This is your fault. I almost lost control of my mask because of that page." Klein cursed in Chinese inwardly so loudly it made him a bit dazed. Knowing that he couldn't keep quiet after that slip, He stopped looking at the hanged man, much to the relief of the man, and just chuckled softly. He put the 5 pages of the diary down, and looked at the 3 people in front of him, and smiled as he said, "My apologies again, I was too absorbed in reading them. I think I went a little too far." Adrian thought in surprise after seeing the fool's near fall. Klein didn't notice anything unusual with him because he had also acted surprised like Audrey and Alger. But to recover so quickly, Klein is seriously good at dodging these things. Pleased, Adrian kept the corners of his mouth from rising. "It is our pleasure, Mr. Fool," the redhead said with a nod. "I'd rather you stay quiet, Mr. Chariot," Klein thought, still angry with the man, but on the outside he just nodded calmly. Audrey, recovering from what happened earlier, nodded gently and smiled faintly. "I can understand, Mr. Fool. I hope to one day be able to exchange information about the contents of the diary. That will require a price." Klein smiled and looked at Justice, he then moved his gaze to the silent hanged man and the relaxed Chariot. Audrey put her palms together and placed them in front of her. "Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Chariot, I have 3 questions to ask. If you think the answer requires a heavy price, tell me what you want. I will do my best to seek them." "No problem," Alger replied, still affected by before. "Fire when ready, Miss Justice," Adrian replied with a smile. Klein nodded and leaned back, making himself more comfortable, which was what he needed after what happened. Audrey thought for a few moments and said, "The first question is related to what Mr. Chariot said last Monday. What does acting really mean? I've been acting as a spectator these past few days and have noticed how the potion's psyche has minimal effects on me." Alger didn't answer, instead he looked at Chariot, but the man was quiet with no interest in answering. Then he shifted his gaze to the fool, as if waiting for him to respond. Klein rubbed his finger along the corners of the table and said in a relaxed manner, "Let me explain this with an analogy. So, we have to dress up and act as the guest, do you understand?" Alger immediately asked, as if he had expected that reply. "So the aforementioned invitation would be the name of the sequence potion?" "That's right," Klein replied. Audrey froze for a moment, feeling like she finally understood what acting meant. Ads by PubFuture. She immediately snapped out of her spectator state due to her excitement. She praised in joy. "What an exceptional method. I think it fits his title. Its style is very compatible with the Fool. I think I finally understand what Mr. Chariot meant by the acting rules." Quote. She paused for a few moments before saying, "I think this is a very valuable answer. My heart will not be at peace accepting this for nothing. Mr. Fool, what do you need in exchange? More pages from Russell's diary or?" Klein paused for a moment. He wanted more information in the sequence about the seer, but he felt that such a low-level question would ruin his mythical image as the Fool. "I can't forget that this could also draw Chariot's attention," Klein thought seriously as he used the corners of his eyes to look at the aforementioned. So he decided on something more mysterious. He adjusted himself and added without changing his expression, "Anything regarding the Antigonus family, even if I'm already aware of them myself." Thanks to what Chariot said last time, he discovered that this family was much more special than he thought. A question related to them fits very nicely into his image as the Fool. Alger was silent for a few seconds. He looked discreetly to his side at the figure of Chariot, seeing that the man was not saying anything. He made up his mind. He looked at the top of the long bronze table and opened his mouth. "Mr. Fool, I think I can pay back immediately with the information you requested right now." "No problem." Klein hid his disappointment by keeping his tone unchanged. "Just when I want Chariot to talk, he keeps his mouth shut. Seriously, what's wrong with this guy?" Alger deliberated over his words and said, "The Antigonus family is an ancient family. Their history can be traced back to the Cataclysm epic before the 4th epic and is related to the 2nd blasphemy slate." While Alger was explaining the history of the Antigonus family to Klein and Audrey, who were listening intently, Adrian was also listening but not as attentively. He hadn't spoken because he didn't want to give a long history class. He prefers to leave that to the wise hanged man. He would have completely ignored what the man was saying but decided to pay a little attention to see if there was a change from the original story. "I similarly have no idea which sequence pathways the Antigonus family held. There are only 2 adjectives that appear repetitively in descriptions of the Antigonus family, and those are in. Nothing different." Adrian thought, a little disappointed. Strange and terrifying. Thinking back to the notebook, the original Klein and his classmates, and what happened to Ray Bieber's mother, it really aptly worded. Klein thought as he began to tap the corner of the long table with the tip of his finger a couple of times. Just when he was about to open his mouth, he heard how Chariot spoke. Mr. Fool, I would like to add a little more information about what Hanged Man said. You can. Klein concealed his joy and waited for Chariot to speak. But then he saw how the man looked at the Hanged Man and Justice and gave them both a sweet smile. Ads by PubFuture. Then Chariot returned his attention to him and chuckled softly. I'd like it to be private, Mr. Fool. Adrian's words caused Alger to take a small breath and Audrey to freeze for a moment. The satisfaction with which Chariot spoke was obvious, and this made the corners of Klein's mouth twitch slightly. As it turns out, Chariot is a spite. Good to know. Klein took note of this as he nodded. He controlled the gray fog to cover the senses of the Hanged Man and Justice, separating them from the discussion. Being separated like this caused Audrey, due to annoyance, to come out of the spectator state and puff out her cheeks in annoyance. Now you know how it feels, Adrian thought as he chuckled again. Klein watched this with the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. You really are spiteful. I won't take much of your time, Mr. Fool, I'll just add a few little things. Anything is useful, Mr. Chariot. Klein thought as he nodded gently. It doesn't matter, he said like it didn't matter. Adrian nodded and smirked. First of all, Mr. Fool, the Antigonus family held the entire seer pathway, Adrian said casually, and Klein felt a chill go up his spine. The Antigonus family held the seer pathway. It's just the same pathway I chose. Is this a coincidence? Before Klein could continue with his thoughts, he heard Chariot speak. As I said in the Tarot Club of the last Monday, the ancestor of the Antigonus family was someone who came close to becoming a god but failed. What are you trying to get at, Chariot? Klein would have narrowed his eyes in suspicion, but he controlled himself and kept his imperturbable image. Almost nothing is known about this ancestor. I only know one thing about him. He was someone very feared during the fourth epoch because of how terrifying and strange he was. He had a title during that time before disappearing. The ancestor was known as the Half-Fool, Adrian said calmly as he smiled at Klein, who froze in place. The Half-Fool. What kind of script is this? Is the title of the Fool more than just a title? What does it mean that the ancestor was known as the Half-Fool? Klein's mind was at full power, but he realized that Chariot was smiling at him and it made his stomach drop. Don't tell me Chariot thinks I'm the ancestor of the Antigonus family. Is that why he mentioned it last week? Calm down, Klein. Calm down. This is actually good. If Chariot thinks so, then my mask will be stronger. As long as I don't give him reason to suspect otherwise, then Chariot won't find out that I'm actually a weak sequence 9. It had barely been a few seconds that he was silent, so maintaining his mysterious image, he opened his mouth slowly while nodding. Thank you for the information, Mr. Chariot. It is very valuable to me, so tell me, is there something you want in return? Please don't ask for anything exaggerated. If you ask me for money, it will be impossible for me to pay you. Klein thought, frightened for his thin, malnourished, and sick wallet. This information was obviously very valuable, and Chariot clearly knows it. If the man were to ask for money, his mask would fall apart. Chariot will be the type of person who can accept. Klein tried to think of a solution while waiting for the answer from the smiling Chariot. Adrian had to control himself to keep from letting out a loud laugh. What Klein had said had struck him as a very good joke. The kind you say to your friends at 2 a.m. with more alcohol in your blood than it should be permitted. Hee Klein, you should consider yourself a comedian. You tell me to ask you for something like you could afford it in the first place. I know you're not even a full Nighthawks now, and with that salary you earn you couldn't pay me even if you worked your whole life. Klein, in my world you're known as the poor god for a reason. I'm not cruel enough to ask a poor god for money he doesn't have. Mentally insulting the poor Klein, Adrian slightly shook his head. I would like to exchange the reward of this information for contribution points, Mr. Fool. If I ever need anything from you, I'd like to use these contribution points as payment. Is this acceptable to you, Mr. Fool? He finished with a slight nod, and Klein internally jumped in relief, but at the same time, he felt like he was being ripped off. He was no stranger to contribution points, as it was something Captain Dunn had mentioned briefly. But because he understood what it was, he could also get an idea of what Chariot wanted to achieve. I am saved this time, but that doesn't mean I am out of the danger zone. Chariot won't ask for something exaggerated as a favor in the future, right? If he asks for something as protection, I'm afraid I won't be able to do anything. I'm just a weak sequence 9. Despite feeling that he was falling into a scam, Klein had to accept it, so, nodding gently, he opened his mouth and said solemnly, "Very good, Mr. Chariot. Your payment will be converted into contribution points and you can redeem them when you see fit." Adrian nodded calmly. "By your will, Mr. Fool." Klein didn't say anything else but released the gray fog that covered the hanged man's and Justice's senses. Audrey, quickly in her spectator state, looked at Chariot and could easily detect how pleased and amused the man was. Mr. Fool was still as mysterious as ever without any change. It was obvious that the exchange of information had been fruitful and that the man had gained something. Wanting to know what Chariot might have said to Mr. Fool made Audrey want to pout her cheeks. Meanwhile, Alger just gave Chariot a quick glance and then ignored him. Despite wanting to know what the man was talking with the fool, he knew better and did not urge those matters. He hadn't lived so much by being curious, but he had been careful and calculating. Not wanting the silence to continue, Adrian turned to look at Audrey and spoke with a raised eyebrow. "Miss Justice, will you tell us what your next question is or what?" Ads by PubFuture. Yes. I'm sorry. Audrey was taken by surprise for a few moments, but she quickly recovered. "My second question is, what is the name of Spectator's subsequent potion? Where can I find the clues?" Audrey may have asked the three men in front of her, but her attention was focused on the hanged man who, upon being looked at, stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. "I will answer this question for free because I guide you on this path. The subsequent Spectator sequence is Telepathist Sequence 8. The old name of Sequence 7 is Psychoanalyst, but it is called Psychiatrist now. This is what I found out from a member of the Psychology Alchemist. I think they must have quite a number of formulas from this pathway. You know the location of that particular member of the Psychology Alchemists?" Audrey asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Alger gave a weird laugh. "I do. He is immersed in the ocean around Sonia Island. I sank him with my bare hands. If you'd like to look for the alchemist psychology. I have to apologize because I severed the clues." Sink. Audrey was at a loss for what answer or expression to wear, but before she could feel disappointed she heard Chariot laugh. "There is no need to be disappointed, Miss Justice. I am very familiar with psychology alchemists, so I can tell you how to find them," Adrian said with a smile, and Audrey's eyes sparkled for a few moments. "What would be the price of this information, Mr. Chariot?" Audrey quickly got herself under control and returned to her spectator state. She asked weakly. £500 will be enough." £500. Last time it was £200 and now it's more than double. That could rent a high-end house for almost 3 years. Klein quickly calculated how many things he could buy with that money, and the one that prevailed was a better house for him and his siblings. Perhaps he should try to move out. So little. Audrey was surprised for a few moments, but she recovered and nodded gently. "I accept, Mr. Chariot. Would you like it to be a private exchange?" Adrian shook his head and looked at Alger, who didn't say anything. Then the redhead let out a laugh while shaking his head. "No need, Miss Justice. I don't mind Mr. Hanged Man listening. After all, he won't gain anything from this," Adrian added mentally, but Audrey, despite wanting to protest, could only nod. "Please tell me how I can find the psychology alchemists," she asked excitedly. "You don't have to find them," Adrian replied quickly, and this caused Audrey to give him a stunned look. "What do you mean, Mr. Chariot?" she asked, barely hiding her bitterness. She had snapped out of the spectator state due to the surprise. "Hee, you are a noble Miss Justice. They will come to you," Adrian said, amused, and Audrey's confusion only grew, as did her annoyance. Taking a few short breaths to control herself, she concealed her annoyance and said, "Please explain yourself, Mr. Chariot. Psychology alchemists have an habit of recruiting nobles, so all you have to do to find them is say you're looking for one of Spectator's main ingredients and they'll come to you with flowers and chocolates." Adrian's voice was amused and provocative, and this made even Klein feel the veins in his neck throb. The three of them there wanted to hit the man, and none more than Audrey, who was shaking lightly with fury. "But I highly recommend not doing that," Adrian quickly added in a voice as cold as ice. This sudden change made the three people who were previously eager to hit the man now stunned. Audrey unconsciously swallowed and asked with a slightly scared voice. What do you mean by that, Mr. Chariot?" Adrian sighed before answering in a deep voice. Ads by PubFuture. You should know one thing about the Beyonders of the spectator path. In high sequences, they are able to influence people in such subtle ways that they will never realize they are being controlled. They can pass for you to follow a script that they planned without you knowing that you are being used by them. If you were to try to contact them now, your destiny would be to be their faithful puppet without you knowing that you are. You will be used to spy on your loved ones and conspire against them. If any of you find yourself with too many coincidences in a short period of time, I'm sorry to say that you are already in the script. Everyone there felt a chill go up their spines, and Klein came to a realization. Is this what the Emperor meant by? Adrian let out a short laugh that snapped everyone out of their fearful state. With that information, it will be another 500 pounds, Miss Justice. Audrey was stunned and looked at the man with her mouth hanging slightly. She was completely lost for words, and her expression had broken into a goofy face that even the gray fog was not able to completely cover it. Klein watched this and couldn't help but feel sorry for the girl. Even justice is not safe from bullying. Klein would have tried to defend the girl, but the information Chariot had revealed was too valuable. If someone had to pay for it, it better be the rich lady. And this was also known by Audrey, who only sighed while nodding weakly. Fair enough, Mr. Chariot. Do you have anything else to add? Audrey asked out of courtesy without expecting anything else. I also have the telepathous potion formula if you're interested, Adrian said with a big smile. Silence filled the giant's palace. They all looked at Chariot as if he had instantly grown multiple heads. Audrey's expression had completely broken, and she was looking at Chariot like he was crazy. It turns out that he had the formula. Was I scammed? She thought incredulously as she tried to regain her composure. Klein and Alger felt sorry for the lady who was receiving the worst bullying from Chariot so far. Audrey, still a little stunned, nodded weakly. How much do you want for the formula, Mr. C. Chariot? It would be 400 pounds, Miss Justice, or in exchange, all the ingredients of the spectator potion, the redhead said with a sweet voice. Audrey and Alger hit 2 and 2 together and both looked at the man in shock. He hadn't asked for the potion formula but the ingredients. They both thought the same. He always knew the spectator potion formula. Klein watched the reaction of the hanged man and Justice with a flat face. His left elbow was resting on the armrest of his seat and he was supporting his head with his index and ring fingers. Honestly, he seized the moment to do that because he needs to rest his head. Mr. Chariot first charged Miss Justice 500 pounds for the information on the psychology alchemists. Then, in a maneuver worthy of a con man, he charged another 500 pounds. Finally, after all those rounds, he reveals that he has the formula for telepathis and he will sell it to her in exchange for 400 pounds or all the ingredients of the spectator potion. That adds up to 1,400 pounds in total, or 1,000 pounds plus a potion ready to be brewed. His mind was blank just thinking about the amount of money that had been dealt here. With that money, he could buy a house in a good neighborhood and hire multiple servants. While this was going on in Klein's mind, Audrey was recounting the ingredients that were left in her family's vault. I still have enough for all the supplementary materials, but I don't have any more main ingredients. Maybe I can enlist Glaint's help to complete this. His vault should have a matured manhell fish's eyeball and the goat-horned blackfish blood. But this might get his attention. Lately, he's become very close with the self-centered Dutch. Although my allowance is a lot, spending so much money all at once may draw my parents' attention. Both options were annoying to Audrey, but she finally settled on the first one. With her new status as a spectator, it will be very easy to prevent Glaint from finding something weird in her rare order. It would be the same thing she did with the other ladies when she used them to spread the method revealed by the fool, but much easier because this time it would only be one person instead of a large group of ladies. And honestly, Glaint isn't very bright, so it would be easier. Making up her mind, she looked at the smiling Chariot seriously. I'll get you the spectator potion ingredients in exchange for the telepathous potion formula, but it'll take some time. On the other hand, the payment for the information can be delivered. Do you have a place where I can send the money? Adrian smiled victoriously. He had not only gained 1,000 pounds today, but he had also gotten all the ingredients of the spectator potion for free. This was one of the Beyonders that he wanted the most on his team because someone who controls his mental state would be very helpful. Now I just need to find someone worthy of giving the potion, but that won't be hard. The ingredients were, but that is already solved. Adrian thought, extremely pleased. Not wanting to make Miss Justice wait any longer, he replied. That won't be necessary, Miss Justice. I'll give you the incantation of my messenger and she'll take care of taking the money, just make sure you have it ready when you summon her. Adrian said with a smile, and this caught the attention of the three present. A messenger. Chariot has a messenger. Alger was surprised by this information. In his eyes, the figure of Chariot became more special. He was very familiar with the messengers and understood that they were not easy to obtain and even dangerous to try. That Chariot had again showed his skill. What is a messenger? Something like a postman, Audrey blurted out. Well done, Miss Justice. Klein praised mentally as he waited for Chariot's explanation. Another 100 pounds, Chariot said with a smile, and Audrey shot him a fierce look. Chariot, don't you have any shame? Justice may be rich, but there is a limit. Or do you want to leave her dry? Klein cursed in Chinese in his mind at the shameless man. Adrian let out a loud laugh as he shook his head. I'm playing Miss Justice. Audrey huffed in response as she looked away. Seriously, she looks like my little cousin even in that, the redhead reminisced. Shaking his head to get the image out of his head, Adrian explained. Messengers, also known as contracted creatures, are the creatures of the spirit world on a contract. Due to their abilities to travel through the spirit world, they served as a method of communication between the contractor and the sender-receiver secretly. By using the incantation that I will tell you, you will invoke my messenger and she will deliver the money to me. Adrian finished explaining calmly and Audrey nodded in wonder. Ads by PubFuture. She wanted to form a contract with a creature to have her own messenger and was about to ask Chariot how. But she stopped just in time. The experiences of a few moments ago kept her at bay. So she just calmly nodded and re-entered her spectator state. What is the incantation of your messenger, Mr. Chariot? She asked faintly. The redhead easily felt how he was being watched, but he didn't care. He recounted the incantation of his messenger. The three people listened attentively to the incantation and Audrey repeated it a few times to memorize it. First, you must make a simple altar with a candle, light it and say this incantation in Hermes. Audrey nodded, already understanding what she had to do. I'll send you the money as soon as the tarot club is over. Adrian just nodded and fell silent, but it was clear that he was smiling. Silence returned on the long bronze table and Audrey quickly realized that her most important question was still missing. She took a shaky breath and again was unable to maintain her spectator status. She asked bashfully. The third question. If, and I'm saying if, a normal animal were to drink a sequence 9 potion, what would happen? An uncomfortable silence reigned in the Palace of Giants. What kind of question is that? Klein thought, dumbfounded as he touched his glabella twice unnoticeably and looked at Justice's aura. He watched as Justice's aura quickly turned frantic, nervous, and a little embarrassed. The dog of imagination is online, Adrian thought with a smile and couldn't help but chuckle. This only made the colors of Audrey's aura grow stronger at Klein's sight. I knew you were an airhead, but I never thought it would be so serious. Klein was astonished but didn't find it the least bit strange. In the previous 2 meetings, he realized that Justice was a bit special. The hanged man was stunned and it took him a while to respond. Normal animals don't have the brains of humans. They can't learn cogitation in a timely way. So, they would be more likely to come to immediate death or break into a monster. However, if they survive the initial ingestion of the potion, they will become an extraordinary creature. If the potion has the ability to increase intelligence, they can become smarter. In other words, you played Intis roulette with 5 bullets in a 6-bullet capacity revolver and you won. Congratulations. Adrian said, amused. Intis roulette was an extremely dangerous game created by Emperor Russell during the time he was searching for the southern continent. You left nothing for the other Russell, not even those kinds of. Next time try to keep the cookie jar out of the children's reach, Adrian added his playful touch and a blush covered Audrey's face. All right, Audrey said, recovering herself. After thinking for another few seconds she added in a calmer tone. I have no further questions. Alger was also silent for a few seconds. Similarly, the business nodded and said. Me neither. Then he and Justice turned to see Chariot, who remained silent for a few seconds. I have a small order. This somewhat surprised everyone present because it was the first time that the man in the tunic asked for something. I need the black hunting spider's compound eye and the brain of the Sphinx. Audrey and Klein frowned. It was the first time for both of them to hear those creatures. I can check, but I'm not sure if I have either, Mr. Chariot, Audrey said, and Adrian just nodded. He wasn't really aiming at Audrey having any of these materials, but rather someone else being a pirate. So he looked at the hanged man who was down. Ads by PubFuture. Alger thought for a few moments and answered. I've seen Sphinx's brain for sale at a pirate auction a while back. Another auction isn't far away, so I'll try to see if it's still for sale. Adrian nodded with a smile. It seems perfect to me, Mr. Hanged Man. You already heard the information of my messenger, so when you get the confirmation of the Sphinx's brain, send me a letter and I will send you the money. How much would you need? Alger then asked. Is your messenger fast enough to deliver the answer? The auction information is only known at the moment and the Sphinx's brain won't last long. Adrian smiled as he nodded. She's a quick cookie. You won't have to worry about that. Thanks to the fact that Klein had his spiritual vision activated, he saw how the hanged man's aura revealed that he was suspicious of what Chariot was saying. Maybe I can take advantage of this. With the decision made, he wrapped the edge of the long table, drawing the attention of the three members who looked at the top, at the figure sitting in the seat of honor. I have something that could fix this. Klein didn't change his stance but said with a smile. This will require your cooperation. He still hadn't turned off his spirit vision, and he immediately saw the hanged man's mistrust turn to nervousness, while Justice was too simple-minded to show care or fear. He hadn't noticed, but he forgot to look at Chariot. Before the trio could respond, Klein comforted them. Don't worry, it's trivial. If it works, this will be beneficial for you, so I won't be paying extra compensation. Go ahead. Audrey instinctively entered the spectator state, but she was unable to see through the thick fog that covered the fool. By your will, Adrian said calmly while nodding slightly. A sideways smile was on his face. By your will, Alger said, steadying himself. Klein moved his finger and said with a smile. Previously, I had said that we would do some experiments that would allow you to ask for a leave of absence. So you wouldn't have to worry about being somewhere uncomfortable on Monday afternoon. It could also be used to quickly communicate with each other. That is our wish. Audrey loosened her tightly knitted eyebrows. Alger thought and said, what do you need us to do? Adrian didn't say anything, he just nodded to what the other two said, showing that he agreed. You can attempt a piece of ritualistic magic. It doesn't need to be too formal. Klein proceeded to explain the modified luck enhancement ritual and even taught Justice how to make a spirit environment for free. Audrey listened with piqued interest as she recorded everything he said. When he had finished, she spoke. What about the incantation? Mr. Fool, what is the corresponding incantation? Alger stopped writing with his fountain pen and looked at the fool. Adrian for his part looked up while holding the corners of his mouth from rising. Here it comes. Klein, who was immersed in the gray fog, tapped the edge of the long table with his finger lightly and said calmly and monotonously in Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Adrian was barely able to keep himself from smiling excitedly. His heart was pounding with great power. Google Meet is online. Klein held his forehead with one hand while with the other he began to touch the table. He could see the impact the incantation had on Justice and the hanged man. But the person he was looking to impact the most was just smiling. Looking at the calm and relaxed Chariot, Klein could only curse in his heart. Why can't you show more impact like Justice or hanged man? Look, that man is shaking. He pointed internally at the trembling hanged man. Klein didn't know how much Chariot knew about the ancestor of the Antigonus family, so all he could do was act like it didn't matter. For now, it doesn't seem like he suspects anything, it even seems like his idea that I'm the ancestor became stronger. The first line of the incantation reads less than the fool that doesn't belong to this era greater than, and according to Chariot, the half-fool ancestor disappeared from history. I didn't realize it, but that first line could also point to that ancestor. It's a good thing I used my connection with this gray fog to separate myself from him. Thinking of the lost ancestor of the Antigonus family made Klein recall multiple plots from his favorite web novels. I have read multiple web novels where a powerful existence, after a great battle, not only loses most of his memories but is also lost in time. One day this existence returns to a world he no longer knows. With no memory of who he is, this existence wanders the world in search of his memories, but the world has already forgotten him and he can only seek help from other people to help him find his story. Maybe Chariot is thinking that of me. Leaving his theories aside, he continued to explain unimportantly. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. ... He ended by describing the incantation that belonged to another type of ritual. After he was done, he smiled. Miss, gentlemen, have you memorized it? Ah, Audrey breathed out. She quickly covered her mouth and seriously remembered. With her enhanced memory as a spectator, she quickly processed the information and repeated the incantation as a form of confirmation. Alger acted more normal. His fountain pen never stopped writing no matter what went through his mind. Adrian, on the other hand, was the calmer and quieter of the two. His pen moved calmly, as if he was copying something the teacher wrote on the board, having all the time in the world to finish. After Klein confirmed that what Audrey said was correct, he smiled and said, "If this test is successful, then we can modify the ritual next time to achieve what we want. I hope you have time to complete the ritual no later than Wednesday. My time is pretty free, Klein, although to annoy you a bit I could do it at 2 a.m. Tuesday. You never said the time of the test," Adrian thought mischievously, but on the outside he only nodded slightly and said respectfully, "By your will. By your will." Alger and Audrey were only a second slower as they had to collect themselves. Not realizing that his hours of sleep were in jeopardy, Klein smiled and said, "According to the hanged man's proposal last week, we will have time for a casual chat after official business has been discussed. Who shall begin?" He made a hand signal for someone to start. Audrey sighed and said, "Mr. Fool, the suggestion you made about the entrance examination and the separation of civil and political affairs has received the approval of several members of parliament. But with the efficiency of this government, it will take at least 6 months for this bill to be approved." She wasn't worried that the hanged man or chariot would be able to track her down with this information. She had made sure to only use hints and guide the wives of the members of parliament to think this was their idea. This made her feel strangely satisfied, as if she had found a way for the spectator to influence the plot of a play. Ads by PubFuture. As quickly as this came, there also came a feeling of dread. What Chariot had said earlier now carried more weight for her. To try to ignore that feeling, she decided to add something that had been a recent topic at gatherings she was having with Glaint. Lately in the East Borough, the activities of James Holmes have been escalating. Last week he destroyed an illegal brothel and released a group of kidnapped people from the southern continent. Adrian internally was a little surprised by this. "I didn't think my name would appear so fast here," the redhead thought as he discreetly looked at Klein with the corners of his eyes. James Holmes. Who is that? A local hero? Klein thought, a bit confused. The last name Holmes caught his attention a bit because he couldn't help but associate it with the famous detective Sherlock Holmes, but after a few seconds of thinking, he shook his head internally. Just a coincidence, he thought as he watched the interaction of the members while supporting his head with his left hand. Alger was also confused by the mention of this name. He wasn't aware of what was going on in Lowen, so he couldn't locate it. He decided that he would do some research when he had the chance. He paused for a few seconds, then he looked at the fool. He deliberated before saying, "In recent decades, the amount of activity of various secret organizations has seen an upward trend. In fact, there are even new secret organizations appearing, some of which have reached a decent number of Beyonders." "Are you asking me about this? I haven't even gained access to information from illegal organizations." Klein merely smiled and did not comment on the hanged man news. He changed the subject and said vaguely, "An ancient power is about to awaken from its slumber." "Is that so?" Alger muttered softly to himself, as if he had remembered something. Watching the short chat between Alger and Klein made the corners of Adrian's mouth twitch slightly. He doesn't even know what he's talking about, but every word he said ended up being true, the redhead thought, full of irony before saying, "I have nothing to say." Klein nodded to Chariot's words, then he looked over the three members and said with a smile, "If there's nothing else to share, then let's end today's meeting here." "By your will, Alger," Adrian and Audrey said at the same time. Klein moved his finger, and just when he was cutting the connection, he saw how Chariot turned to look at Justice. "Miss Justice, don't be surprised if your pet starts talking," the man said mischievously, and Audrey froze. What? She couldn't control herself and ended up screaming, but just at that moment, the connection was cut off. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched hard as he looked at Chariot's seat. "You seriously have no shame?" Shaking his head, he did not leave this space. Instead, he got up from his seat and looked at the symbol that was behind it. Radiant stars formed a strange symbol. Klein had to look closely to be able to identify that symbolized secrecy. And he also saw contorted lines that represented change. Empress Burrow. Audrey saw the old painting that hung on the wall. She felt the softness of the pillow that the pillow secured under her head. She didn't get up immediately but began to remember what had happened at the Tarot Club. Ads by PubFuture. She couldn't help puffing out her cheeks every time she remembered how Chariot had teased her in his last prank before the meeting ended. She could only put that annoyance aside and remembered the most important thing about the meeting. Mr. Fool had a certain confidence in his tone when he told us to try the ritual. Audrey breathed out as she considered this, her body trembling a little. Forget it, since I can't fight it, there's no need to think too much about it. Mr. Fool has always appeared friendly. Remembering the mention of the ritual requested by Mr. Fool also made her remember that she had to summon Mr. Chariot's messenger. She remembered very well how the man had explained how to do it, so she got up and left her room to get the materials. She passed several maids who greeted her and she returned the greeting with a smile. She enters her spectator state and watches all of them calmly. Seeing the calluses on their hands, the wrinkles on their faces, and their damaged hair. She only entered this state for a few moments and then left it. She still remembered Chariot's warnings, so she was careful when she acted. Returning to her room, Audrey locked the door and made the spiritual space as Mr. Fool had told her. She prepared the simple altar with a candle, and from a box in her closet she took out the 1,000 pounds that she put in a bag that she had brought. She lit the candle, put her hands together and spoke. I, she said in ancient Hermes. I summon on my name, changed to Hermes. The special spirit that wanders through the upper realm. The trustworthy spirit who is friendly to humans. The companion spirit of Chariot. At that moment, she felt how the temperature in her room dropped rapidly and a chill went up her spine. Grr! She heard a growl that surprised her, and looking at where the growl came from, she saw how Susie was with her fur standing on end and looking at the space in front of her. Susie, since when are you here? She asked, surprised, but the chill she felt intensified. Susie barked and moved in front of her while barking at something invisible. Susie, what are you doing? Audrey tried to calm her dog down, but Susie wouldn't take her eyes off the front. But there's nothing there, she thought, not understanding what was happening. Susie only started barking when the Chariot messenger incantation ended and the temperature dropped. She came to a realization. The messenger is here. She quickly got up and grabbed the bag with the money and handed it out into the space in front of her. Sorry for the inconvenience. This is Chariot's payment, she said apologetically, and she felt the weight of the bag lessen. She watched in amazement as the bag disappeared, and the room's temperature returned to normal. Chariot's messenger is invisible. No, that can't be. Susie could see it. Maybe it's because she's an animal. Thinking about Susie, she realized that the dog had stopped barking at a certain point and she turned to look at her scared. Susie was chewing on a huge bone and her tail was wagging with joy. Quote. Where did she get that from? Did Chariot's messenger give it to her? She thought dazedly. The bone was as long and thick as her leg. Susie felt the stare at her and stopped chewing on the bone. She looked up and barked happily at Audrey while wagging her tail. The last thing Chariot had said came back in force, and this made her give Susie a strange look. Susie, can you talk? Woof. The dog barked doubtfully, and this made Audrey's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Looking at the old ceiling of his room, Adrian could only sigh as he stood up. In today's tarot club, he had made a lot of gains, but he had also taken the opportunity to subtly warn Klein about the quill. Now that he knows about the coincidences, he should be able to identify the problems faster. I don't know if this will change anything, but it's the only thing I can do. Adrian thought heavily. He wouldn't risk going to Tingen City and coming into range of that damn cheap quill. I don't know if Hunter's Halo can protect me from its influence, but I'm not going to check it, the redhead thought. He was 60% sure that the robe would protect him, but he didn't want to risk his life for a mere 60%. Besides, what am I supposed to do against the baby rapper? The best way I have to hurt him is with Talk Millennium, and I doubt he'll even feel it. He remembered that it took 2 demigod attack level charms to kill the small bastard. Dying is painful and I don't want to return to that black space. I don't even know how many times I can revive, the redhead thought with annoyance as he got up from his bed and sat in his chair. He would have wanted to be like Klein and know how many more times he could resurrect, but the bastard didn't bother to incorporate that information into him. Shaking his head, he put that aside and began to think about what Alger had said. The brain of the Sphinx is in an auction that means a plus in price for the competition. Now I will have 2,200 pounds with the money that Chicho is going to bring, but I will still need more. I have to assume that that brain can fetch even a price of around 4,000 on top of the payment Alger is going to want. And he could not forget that he had to exchange that money for gold pounds or precious stones because he did not believe that pirates accept pounds as payment. And that's just one main ingredient, the redhead thought as he sighed. He still needed the black hunting spider's composite eye, the complete conspirator formula, and not to mention the supplementary ingredients. Money is a problem again, he thought as he shook his head. Looks like I'll have to rob more gangs, the redhead muttered while waiting for Chicho to arrive. He didn't have to wait too long because after 10 minutes the temperature in the room dropped and a chill ran up his spine. Activating his spiritual vision, he saw how the great door of bones was formed and Chicho came out of it carrying a cloth bag. From the rich girl, she said as she extended the bag towards the redhead. Thanks Chicho, the redhead said with a smile as he extended a chocolate bar to the giant woman who took it while nodding. She unwrapped the chocolate and began to eat it as she entered the bone door and left the redhead's room. I wonder if eating so much sugar will hurt her. The redhead joked internally as he opened the bag. Seeing the money he smiled and began to count it quickly. Confirming that the 1,000 pounds were complete, he closed the bag again. Why so quiet, Flora? Are you sleeping? The redhead asked curiously while preparing the ritual to send the money to the City of Calamities. He didn't want to risk someone coming in here and finding the money. Ads by PubFuture. Or to activate the traps he had set in case someone found the place where he hid the mystical materials he uses. Is your memory that bad? I told you that with time I would recover the rest of my powers. I need to rest for that to happen, so yes, I was sleeping, Flora answered annoyed. Adrian gave a short laugh as he shook his head. And just when I was thinking of being nice to you, he falsely lamented for the woman. No need to be angry, Miss Worm. I'm sorry to interrupt your beauty sleep, I just wanted to warn you of something, but I think I'd better keep it as a surprise, the redhead said mischievously as he put the paper with the symbol in its place. Wait, Adrian, what do you mean by that? Warn me of what? Flora reacted, but Adrian ignored her as he knelt and clasped his hands and closed his eyes. The scarlet monarch that burned depravity. Son of A. Flora could only silence her mind to avoid offending the god the redhead was praying to. She didn't know if he could read minds, and she preferred not to risk it having him hear her insulting his blessed. So, with no other option, she could only swallow her insult and wait for the redhead to finish praying. Wrapping the bag in yellowish smoke, Adrian turned and looked at the city that was similar to his hometown. He closed his eyes and tried to control the power of the city. He imagined another city. After a few moments, he opened his eyes again and looked at how the city was still the same. This made him sigh. Why does it keeps failing? The redhead muttered annoyed. He had tried multiple times to change the shape and appearance of the City of Calamities, but every time he tried he failed. This is supposed to be a representation of my subconscious, so why can't I change it? Perhaps my control over it isn't as great as I thought. As he thought that, he looked to the side. He controlled the yellowish smoke around him, causing it to shake and boil. The smoke began to take various forms, including people, objects, and even buildings. After a few seconds, Adrian was now in the middle of the Big Apple. To be specific, Broadway. Cars of all kinds passed by and the sidewalks were full of people. Although it was a copy of Broadway, it had a light golden dust floating all around it. A vein throbbed on his forehead. He could feel his brain working hard and his spirituality was being consumed rapidly. So he cut off the supply and the Big Apple faded back to the simple yellow smoke that surrounded it. He exhaled and looked back at the city in the distance. It's not that my control isn't great, but that there's something that prevents me from doing it, he said faintly. Ads by PubFuture. He had full control to do whatever he wanted outside of the city, but he couldn't do anything with the city itself. And he had an idea of what might prevent him from doing that. The Colosseum, he muttered heavily. It was no coincidence that the Colosseum was located in what he believed to be the center of the City of Calamities. The biggest difference between the outskirts of the city and the interior was the Colosseum. Adrian released a small sigh and began to draw in his mind the sphere of light. That was out of his hands, so with nothing else to do he left the City of Calamities. Opening his eyes and returning to his body, Adrian shook his head and wiped away everything he had used for the ritual. After a while, he was dressed in his worker costume. Like the last few days, he got his face a little dirtier to hide the changes he had undergone. Moving down the street, he was hunched over and every step he took was tiring. He only acted like that until he got to where he hid his clothes as homes. Are you going to tell me what that surprise you mentioned earlier is about? Flora finally spoke after being silent for a long time. Adrian chuckled at the same time that he shook his head. He finished adjusting his black windbreaker before answering. Oh, are you interested now? I'm sorry dear, but telling you would ruin the surprise, he said flirtatiously while laughing, and Flora shuddered. She hadn't liked the redhead's tone at all. But knowing that the man would not reveal what that surprise was, she could only subtly sigh and ask. It is dangerous. Nah, he said before letting out a mischievous laugh. The chill that she felt before returned but stronger, and this worried her. Just what are you going to do this time? Adjusting his mask on his face, Adrian cracked his neck. Okay, now to look for those gangs, he thought with a sharp smile. His targets would be the gangs he had left to destroy here in East Barot. He had personally burned the Creed down. Black Skull was destroyed by the forces of the churches. And he had destroyed Blood Mark by accident. That left another 5 gangs that would have a lot of money since they were focused on human trafficking. And he was sure of that because he still remembered all the money he had taken from the Creed. Thanks to the document he had obtained from the Blood Mark boss's office, Adrian knew exactly the areas where each high-level gang in the East Borough operated. Finding the base of each one would be a matter of time, but there was one thing he had to do first before. Let's see which of the 5 it will be. The redhead murmured, amused while sitting on the roof of a tower and looking at everything from above. He was swinging his legs like a little kid on a swing as information from each gang flashed through his mind. Let's see, I have no interest in attacking the Zemanger gang for now, so they will be ruled out. Red Moon will be discarded merely by their boss. If the Blood Mark data mark Joseph is the second most dangerous under that boss and he was sequence 6, then Red Moon's boss must be of the same sequence or higher. He murmured as he was buffeted by the stinking East Borough breeze. The difference in danger between Joseph and the Red Moon leader was clear from the documents. Not even the name or gender of the leader was known. The only thing that was known was that their nickname was the Doctor. If I go exclusively by the nickname and the name of the gang, then the leader should be from the Moon Pathway. A vampire. After thinking for a few moments, Adrian could only shake his head. He had too little information about the leader to be able to come to a conclusion, so this gang was also ruled out. Only Red Skeleton, Dead Rose, and Dead Shot remain. He murmured to the wind as the breeze gently moved his windbreaker. There's a decent amount of information on each boss and the danger level isn't as high as Red Moon, so any of the 3 will do. Now how to choose one, he said curiously, and he heard Flora's annoyed sigh. Just pick one, how hard can it be? It was bothering her to listen to the redhead speak to the air. Adrian let out a soft laugh. Where's the fun in that? If I have dishes to choose from and they all look equally delicious, how can I fairly choose one? Well, take the one you like the most, it's obvious, Flora said confidently. Quote. Adrian didn't say anything, he just kept quiet, letting the wind move his windbreaker. I can tell you didn't have a good childhood, Adrian said regretfully as he shook his head in mourning. What do you mean by that, princess? Flora roared and continued. I was surrounded by luxuries and riches, I never lacked anything, unlike you who laments in a room in the poorest area of Backland. Adrian ignored the insult and said again regretfully. Not only a bad childhood but also a lonely one. Oh, the misfortune. Oh, the pity. He clutched his chest where his heart was and exclaimed dramatically. He even raised his hand to his face to add more drama. What the fuck are you saying, crazy shit? Flora exclaimed, furious and humiliated. I did have friends growing up. So what did they call you? He asked mischievously, and Flora huffed. They called me by my name, isn't it obvious? Are you an idiot? She said matter-of-factly, as if Adrian had asked her what 2 plus 2 was. You call me an idiot when your brain doesn't seem to have fully developed. If I'm an idiot, then you're a curly-hair baboon who has so many extra chromosomes he has to give them away to avoid popping like a balloon. Plop, Adrian said teasingly while making the sound of a balloon popping with his mouth. Flora felt a vein in her non-existent neck burst from the pressure. Ads by PubFuture. Damned son of a thousand bitch, you unhappy shit bastard, I swear that when I leave here I'm going to kill you. Ha 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 ha. Adrian in response just started laughing like crazy while holding his stomach. How come you don't understand? The question was so simple. He said after calming down, and Flora growled like an animal. What do you mean? A nickname, you animal? He said satisfied, and Flora's growling stopped. What nickname did your good friends give you? Flora was quiet for a few seconds before asking in confusion. What is a nickname? You're kidding, Adrian replied in a heartbeat. He refused to believe that Flora was being serious. I don't know what a nickname is, Flora said, annoyed, and Adrian had to bite his tongue to keep from laughing more. That's as sad and depressing as it is funny, he said incredulously, and Flora screamed again. Fuck you, son of a bitch. Okay, I'll stop now, the redhead said, raising his arms as a sign that he had no weapons. A nickname is a name given to a person that alludes to their characteristics or personality. It's normal among friends or loved ones. It's like when your dad calls you honey or when your mom calls me master, he explained with a mischievous smirk. So is that, she murmured, finally understanding, but then she caught the last thing the man had said. Leave my mom out of this. Hee, my fault, he said with a wink. His mask was on the side of his head, showing his face. He was very high so no one could see him. Well, what is the nickname your friends gave you? Adrian asked. For example, my family used to call me Little Rocky, he said with a small smile, returning to the topic. Why would your family nickname you Little Rock? Flora asked, confused, and Adrian chuckled. It was a family joke, you wouldn't understand, he said calmly as he looked at the horizon. Flora did not give importance to this and tried to remember her childhood days from more than 180 years ago. After being silent for a few seconds, she answered. My friends used to call me Dancing Worm. Adrian was a bit surprised by this. Actually, it's a cute nickname. They called you that because you like to dance, or what? They called me that because once I choked on the core of an apple and began to roll on the ground as if I were a worm. Quote. Adrian was lost for words for a few moments. After a few seconds he could only say, oh. This made Flora suddenly embarrassed and tried to change the subject as quickly as possible. What does this have to do with picking a gang? Adrian noticed what Flora wanted to do but just let it slide as he could understand having a tacky nickname. Ads by PubFuture. His friends from Kinder used to call him Timmy Turner after all. Putting that aside, he let out a soft laugh as he held up a finger. It's actually quite simple. A small flame formed on his finger and he began to write on the tile. What kind of games did you play with your friends? Hide and seek, who says, and we used to play with the pet of one of them, she said while looking at what the redhead is doing with curiosity. Hee, I used to do that with my friends too, but we also played a game called Chaser, he said while finishing writing the second line. One of us had to be chosen to chase the others, and if you were caught then you also became a chaser. How is that fair to the others if the pursuer only gets stronger and they become weaker? Flora asked, and Adrian gave a soft laugh. Well, the pursuer gives the others a 30-second advantage, allowing them to hide or move away a certain distance because there was a limit in which one could move away. The game ended after 6 minutes, and if there was one person left without being caught, the pursuer lost. Then the pursuer has the disadvantage. Flora said in surprise, and Adrian nodded with a smile. That's why hardly anyone offered to be, and we had to choose one. To make it as fair as possible, we made up a short song, he said, finishing writing the third line. Since the song started, he put his finger on the first line. Until this is over, his finger flicked between the 3 lines in a rhythm. And when the song ended in you, he said, pointing to the second line. Adrian smiled and said faintly, you were the pursuer. What a curious way of choice. Flora couldn't help but praise the creative way they had created. Adrian gave a short laugh as he placed his finger back on the first line. I already explained how it worked, now I'll sing you the song, Adrian said, amused. Ta, he touched the first line. Te, he touched the second one. T, the third line. Tu, he returned to the first line. Tu, the luck will be for you. Chocolate of peanuts. It is you. Ta, te. T, two, the song ended and Adrian looked at where his finger had stopped with a smile. Deadshot will be, adjusting his mask on his face and the burnt band on his left arm, Adrian smiled as he leapt from the tower. The tower was quite tall, at least 25 meters high. The wind whipped wildly at his windbreaker and he let out a childish laugh as gravity pulled him closer and closer to the ground. The redhead was not scared by this because he was in the shadow that the tower made. About 3 meters from the ground, Adrian sent spirituality to the burnt band and shadows enveloped him. He then stepped out of the shadows into an alleyway still laughing like a child. That never gets old, he said between laughs as he grabbed a bag that was hidden and slung it over his shoulder. You're a child, Flora said, exasperated by the redhead's attitude. You won't deny it was fun, Adrian replied as he headed in the direction of the deadshot zone using the alleys. Yes, of course, she said sarcastically. Flora, I welcome you to Wolf Troth, Adrian exclaimed, making a slight bow while standing on a roof. Flora would have rolled her eyes if she could, but since it was impossible in her current state, she settled for a tired sigh. Adrian chuckled softly as he looked at the area in front of him. Like the rest of the East Borough, the Wolf Troth area was full of poor and homeless people. The buildings were old and poorly maintained. Some seemed close to collapse. Deadshot is a bit of a special gang. They are the biggest arms dealers in the entire East Borough. If any of the gangs in the East Borough have any firearms, they certainly bought them from them. The boss is a bit abnormal. He's in the habit of seeing every gun deal completed and he's also a human trafficker. How come you know all that? Flora asked, confused. I read it, Adrian said honestly. Quote. Neither of them said anything for a few moments. After a while, Flora let out a light sigh. My fault, I don't know what I was expecting, Flora said calmly, already accepting this. Hee. Adrian winked from under his mask as he tilted his head to the right. Don't do that again, Flora said with a shudder, and the redhead chuckled. Sorry, he fake apologized and Flora noticed this but let it go. Ads by PubFuture. She already knew the man's personality. So what's the plan? How will you find Deadshot's base? She said, trying to get back on topic. It's quite simple, Adrian said as he pointed to a man in the distance. He was a man in his late 40s and quite thin with ugly scars on his hands. What's so special about him? Is he a gang member? Flora asked, surprised. That had been fast. But Adrian shook his head softly and pointed at someone else. This time it was a middle-aged woman with pale skin and damaged hair, her hands bore ugly scars. This confused Flora a bit, but Adrian didn't aim long at the woman but switched to someone else. He repeated this 3 more times and Flora noticed a pattern. All people have scars on their hands. This time she paid attention to the hands of the people that the redhead had pointed out. She then realized that all the scars were similar. All the people looked like something they were holding had exploded. She used her decryption ability on this, and with the information the man had revealed earlier, she quickly came to a conclusion. Deadshot is a gang that specializes in selling weapons illegally. They are likely poor quality firearms and they need to test them before selling them, so they use people for that. But why? It is not necessary to use a person to test a firearm, Flora said, and Adrian let out an impressed whistle. Bingo, you hit the jackpot, he praises her while clapping. Flora ignored this and went back to looking at the people. As I told you, the boss of Deadshot is abnormal. The guy is a sadist and prefers to see people test defective weapons. If none fail, then he will give them a defective one to hurt them so he can laugh at them. Adrian explained while also looking at the people with the scars. People know that this can happen, but because they receive a small payment they are willing to take the risk, he said calmly, what people were willing to do to eat. I understand, Flora said, her voice serene. So you have those people now. What? We choose, Adrian answered as he sat on the roof. It's common for those people to come back to test the weapons, so we just have to pick one and follow them. Do you have any recommendations? The redhead asked Flora, who frowned. Why me? Couldn't you do it? Because you have a better intuition and it will be easier and faster that way, Adrian explained calmly. Flora was silent for a few seconds, but then she sighed. The redhead was right. Give me a moment. Adrian smirked and nodded. Flora looked at all the people who had scars on their hands. She then closed her senses and entered a state of semi-cogitation. She recalled the appearances of the people who had scars on their hands. Her spirituality began to flow slowly and she let it guide her. Ads by PubFuture. People disappeared one by one, first the 40-year-old man, then the middle-aged woman. After a few moments, only one remained. Flora came out of the semi-state of cogitation and spoke. The curly hair boy. Adrian nodded and immediately located the person Flora was referring to. He was a boy around 12 years old, he had curly brown hair and gray eyes, he had a scar on his forehead that went down to his right eyebrow and his hands had ugly scars. He wore a patched t-shirt and holey pants, his shoes were old and too big for him. He was skinny, like all the East Borough kids. And like all East Borough kids he was surrounded by other kids watching the people go by, obviously looking for someone to pickpocket. Adrian looked at the boy curiously but then smiled. Although he was quite far away from the boy, thanks to his enhanced eyesight he could see him clearly. He saw how the boy looked deeply at the group of people passing by and after a few moments he signaled to a bigger boy and another thinner one with a strange head. Fatty nodded and moved in the direction of a hunched bald man. While Peanut moved in the direction of a woman. Fatty purposefully sped up his pace until he collided with the man, knocking the man to the ground, and continued long ignoring the man who was rubbing his head. Peanut did the same with his victim and fled, leaving the woman on the ground. The boy for his part moved in the direction of another group and quickly stole the wallets of several people. But look at that, he said surprised looking at the boy. Not yours by any chance? He asked as he moved across the ceiling following the boy. Flora huffed. Funny but no, his movements, although good, were too slow to be considered a true thief, she replied, not paying attention to the insult and Adrian nodded in understanding. If the kid isn't a real thief then he isn't. Demigod words. But not wanting to risk alerting the brat, Adrian used his index finger and quickly double-tapped his left palm. He watched as the brat's aura appeared and it was a soft but turbulent and slightly transparent silver aura. This surprised Adrian a bit. He immediately slowed down and shrank slightly and started using the shadows to move. He was no longer looking directly at the boy but only his shadow. Well, who would have thought? He muttered a little incredulously as he moved. The boy was not a normal human. He was a half-Beander. It looks like he's pretty good mentally, so monster is off the table. Reader is also off the table, the aura is very different but has similarities. Adrian tried to guess which pathway the boy was as he followed him about 4 blocks down and saw him enter an alley. Peanut and Fatty were also in the alley, they were waiting for the child.